Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Zachariah Renfro, and today I'm going to teach you a little bit about evolutionary ethics. Evolutionary ethics was originally founded in the mid-1800s as an offshoot of Charles Darwin's evolutionary theory. It's a theory that argues that morality is an evolved trait that humans have evolved with over time, and as evolutionary theory has grown over time, so has evolutionary ethics. Evolutionary ethics was pretty popular in the mid-1800s up into the early 1900s, but at that time it went by a slightly different name, Social Darwinism. It advocated for things such as eugenics, racial segregation, and the sterilization of people such as the disabled or the mentally ill. It started to fall out of favor after G.E. Moore argued that evolutionary ethics committed the naturalistic fallacy. The fallacy itself is the idea that because something is prevalent in nature or because it exists in nature, that it is good, when we find just as many bad things in nature as we do good things. Moore's larger point was that ethics, much like law and government, were meant to help guide us in the right direction, not necessarily just to show where these things might have come from. Additionally, evolutionary ethics suffered from Hume's is-ought problem, right? Just because something is a certain way doesn't mean that it ought to be that way. And this is a problem that many things within social sciences or within fields such as anthropology or sociology suffer with, which is they do all these studies, they observe all these things, and they find out, the Kookaloo tribe does these things, instead of saying that these are the things the Kookaloo tribe ought to do. After evolutionary ethics fell out of favor, it was reintroduced in the mid-1970s by Edward Wilson. Wilson argued that we needed to take ethics out of the hands of the philosophers and put it into the hands of the scientists. He advocating for using more naturalistic or scientific methods in examining ethics. He felt that ethics should be studied in the same way that biology or physics or chemistry are. Now, I do need to make a slight distinction here. Methodological ethical naturalism is the argument that ethics needs to be examined in a more scientific way, using things such as sociological data or experiments or things of that nature. Whereas metaphysical ethical naturalism argues that there's no supernatural things, no gods, no supernatural things, no ghosts, nothing that can't be directly observed and monitored via the scientific method. So I wanted to make sure that that distinction was laid out, because even though we're not necessarily exploring metaphysical ethical naturalism, if you were to search ethical naturalism, you might have metaphysical ethical naturalism come up, and I wanted to make sure that you were aware that those two things were slightly different and what the difference between them was. So returning to the previous topic, evolutionary ethics argues that all these moral things that we see, the fact that humans are somewhat moral, right? We're not completely amoral. We live in a society, and at our most base levels, we tend to feel that there are some certain things that are right and wrong. They argue that those are evolved traits. They evolved to help us cooperate as early primates, and they stuck with us as we continue to grow. We see there is good evidence among that even today with studies of chimpanzees, gorillas, bonobos, and capuchin monkeys. All these monkeys try to act somewhat ethically, or at least as ethically as you could expect for an early primate. For example, capuchin monkeys will reject unfair pay. So if one monkey gets a cucumber for doing a task and the other monkey gets a grape for doing a task, the capuchin monkeys will rebel against that. They're smart enough to know unfair treatment. With more advanced apes, such as gorillas or chimpanzees, we see penchants for sharing and teamwork. They will also try to reconcile after they've had fights or disagreements among each other, again, trying to keep the social bond strong. We also see evidence for this in the examination of babies. Studies done by Stanford in their baby lab, which examines the actions and reactions of infants, show that when given the choice between a puppet that was shown to be mean and a puppet that was shown to help, they would choose the puppet that was shown to help. They, even at that early age, could recognize when one puppet was being unfair to another puppet. However, these babies also tended to show extreme biases towards individuals or puppets which were shown to share similarities with them. So in an example where a baby had to choose between graham crackers and animal crackers, if the baby chose graham crackers, the researchers would bring out a puppet and have it do the same thing in front of the baby. And what they found was that if the baby observed the puppet doing something different, so instead of choosing graham crackers, choosing animal crackers, they would prefer for that puppet to be punished or to be treated differently or excluded. The reason for this, they believe, is that humans have evolved to want to find people that share similar traits to us, and we're seeing the most extreme example of that with babies. Within the same series of studies, they also studied toddlers, and toddlers from the ages of 3 to 5 tended to, if given the choice between getting an equal reward for them and a stranger or getting a reward that benefits them and puts a stranger at the disadvantage, they'll choose the reward that benefits them and puts a stranger at the disadvantage, showing a preference toward elevated social hierarchy, right? Showing that they are higher up the ladder than the other person. So we see with early humans, with babies and toddlers, that ethical responses can be a bit of a mixed bag. So we see preferences towards fairness, but we also see preferences towards unfairness as well. And this is something that evolutionary ethics struggles with to find answers to. For evolutionary ethics, morality is something that's evolved. However, that doesn't really help you so much with figuring out how you should act within society. Some argue that objective moral facts, or what we imagine to be objective moral facts, are really illusions created by our genes. This is the argument put forward by famous thinker and scientist Richard Dawkins. This argument is that any of these things that we believe to be true or think are true across, large swaths of people are really just our genes playing a trick on us. Now, the work of Richard Dawkins and other scientist related to him has argued that what we believe to be moral facts, or what we believe to be evidence for large-scale moral conditioning among humans, for example, a human penchant towards protecting one's own kin, they argue that those moral facts are really just the programming of our genes. So any ideas about shared morality or objective morality are just an illusion put up by our genes. And it goes so deep within us, almost like a subconscious, that we can't quite understand it ourselves. Of course, this view does have some problems. Moral facts, unlike non-moral facts, have a bit of prescriptive force to them. If I say to you, John stole this, the next idea that would come up is we should do something about John, or we should do something to John. Whereas if I tell you the sun is out or it is raining, it doesn't prescribe any additional action, right? A moral fact in itself tends to prescribe certain types of actions. So if moral facts are not real, and if they are just an illusion, then all our moral beliefs are merely accidents. We don't have any justified true beliefs. Now, this would mean that all of our views about how the world should operate are essentially negated by extreme moral relativism. Because there can be no justified true beliefs, no one can be right about a moral state or a moral condition. And you can imagine, as can I, why that might not be a preferable state of affairs, being that there could be no justification for things such as criminal justice, or there could be no justification for certain styles of life, right? We can't say that something is better because any ideas we might have about that are purely accidental. So putting all that aside, evolutionary ethics gives us a pretty interesting pathway that we can explore when it comes to examining human moral actions and human moral processes. similar to experimental philosophy, also known as XPhi, using scientific methods and using scientific techniques as well as data from things such as sociological studies or anthropological information or historical information can help us better understand some of the moral basis as well as some of the ways that we can better influence moral actions. Now, with all that said, evolutionary ethics is sort of a meta-ethical theory. It doesn't so much help us in determining what we should do in individual situations. You know, for example, is it okay to lie and call in sick to work? But it does give us some idea about the foundations of our moral philosophies. More specifically, there are ways that one could take bits of evolutionary ethics and apply them to other schools of ethical thought, particularly when it comes to understanding how humans view certain things. Now, again, looking at the is-ought problem, how humans view certain things isn't the same as how they ought to be, right? That's the reason we have laws, and that's the reason we have jurisprudence, because there's a big gap between what we do and what we want people to do. But it can give us better insight into how these things form and how we can better relate ethical concepts across multiple groups or across different cultures or across different groups of people. Now, when it comes to evolutionary ethics and when it comes to how we relate to evolutionary ethics, I do think there is some validity to different ideas within evolutionary ethics. And I don't think it's necessarily a contradiction in terms for us to say something to the effect of humans evolved in a certain way to have pro-social motives and to have certain moral ideas, and to also say that there are objectively correct ways to do things, right? So when it comes to metaphysical ethical naturalism, a really hardcore metaphysical ethical naturalist could even exclude things such as economic laws or things to do with supply and demand or other extreme ideas like that. But what we see is with ethics as well as with things such as economics or with political theory is that just because it's not something that we can go out and, pick up from a forest, right? You can't pick up something like justice or fairness off of the forest floor, doesn't mean that there's not an objective moral fact about it, right? So if we assume that humans evolved a certain way to live in society and to be pro-social creatures, it is also consistent with that to say that there are objective moral laws which prescribe the things which are best for human society, right? If there was an objective set of moral laws that were objectively moral and ethical, it's almost certain that if everyone followed those moral laws, society would be in a better place, right? This takes us back to Kant's idea of the kingdom of ends. If everyone acted morally, then we would live within this kingdom of ends and society would flourish. But let me know what you think. If you're one of my students, I can't wait to hear from you in the weekly meeting or in the forums. If you're someone here on YouTube, comment down in the comments below. Give this video a like or whatever it is that people do. And I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much.